My CEO wife, Ava Sterling, was just throwing one of her usual tantrums. After a petty argument, I spent the night in the guest room to give her space. Nobody could have guessed that by the next morning, I would vanish without a single word, taking $80 million with me. She called my phone incessantly, but when the call was finally answered, it wasn't me on the other end. It was her father, Martin Sterling. His voice was cold as he delivered the news. "James has already divorced you, Ava. That money was the settlement I promised him," Martin continued. "It is compensation for the years he spent at your beck and call." Ava stood there, paralyzed. "What do you mean? How could I not know that James and I are divorced?" Martin replied with an emotionless tone. "I had the divorce papers ready before the wedding even took place. The moment he signed them, it became official," he added. Even after hearing it directly from her father, Ava refused to believe the truth. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How could the man who loved her so deeply just turn around and walk away? What she never suspected was the truth behind our marriage. 3 years ago, her parents were the ones who approached me. They laid a contract out in front of me. They wanted me to stay by Ava's side for exactly 3 years, following her every command and keeping her safe. In exchange, they promised to hire the world's leading specialist to save my younger sister, Alicia Miller, who was battling a terminal illness. They also offered me a substantial financial settlement for my time. Now, there were only 4 days left on that contract. "The final balance will be wired to your account in a single transaction," Martin told me. Hearing those words made my heart race with relief. I looked at him and offered a sincere thank you. 3 years ago, the Sterlings sought me out and had me sign that life-changing agreement. All I had to do was stay with Ava and obey her every whim. Once the 3 years were up, they would ensure Alicia got the treatment she needed. They also promised me enough money to live a comfortable, worry-free life for the rest of my days. I didn't hesitate for a second. It didn't matter that Ava had a terrible temper or was incredibly difficult to deal with. Every ounce of effort I put into managing her moods felt like it actually meant something if it meant saving my sister. In just 5 more days, I would finally be reunited with the only family I had left in this world. Right then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an iMessage from Ava. The message was blunt and short. "Get to the Onnit Herd." I paused for a second. The Onnit Herd was an upscale bar in downtown Chicago that Ava frequented. I gripped my phone tightly. Martin noticed the look on my face and immediately knew it was a command from his daughter. He waved his hand, dismissing me so I could go to her. I stepped out of the massive, classic colonial villa. The estate was incredibly secluded. I had to walk for a significant distance before I could finally hail a cab. I had barely sat down in the taxi when another iMessage from Ava popped up telling me to move faster. I simply typed back, "Almost there," and then I turned off my phone entirely. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the bar. As soon as I pushed open the door to the private lounge, Ava's eyes locked onto mine. She scowled, her face full of irritation. "Did you crawl here? Even a pig would have made better time than you." I had heard that kind of verbal abuse so many times over the past 3 years that I was completely numb to it. Ethan Thorne was sitting right next to her. He had his arm draped over her shoulders, putting on a fake show of being the voice of reason. "Maybe he just got held up with something," Ethan suggested smoothly. Ava immediately snapped back. "What could he possibly have to do? All he does is follow me around like a lost puppy. It is absolutely exhausting." She sounded genuinely annoyed. The people around her started laughing and teasing her, saying, "You have no idea how lucky you are to have someone so devoted." Ava just let out a cold snort and didn't bother responding. I stood there in silence, saying nothing. After all, she wasn't lying. My actual job description was to center my entire life around her. Suddenly, a loud commotion broke out downstairs. Everyone in the lounge rushed to the railing to see what was happening in the main hall. It turned out to be a high-stakes drinking competition. The prize was a rare, limited-edition designer bracelet. "I want that," Ethan said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the prize. Ava didn't hesitate. "All right, I'll make sure you get it." She gave Ethan a doting smile before turning her cold, demanding gaze back to me. "Go down there and win that bracelet for Ethan." I glanced down at the crowd. There were dozens of contestants, most of whom looked like they could drink me under the table without breaking a sweat. I hesitated for a moment before looking at Ava. I work for you, Ava. Doing favors for other people isn't part of my job description. The contract was very specific. It required me to stay by her side, protect her, and comply with her wishes. It said nothing about running errands for her friends. I knew I had every right to say no. Ava wasn't about to back down. Then consider this a direct order from me, she snapped. She leaned back into the velvet sofa with a smug, arrogant smile. What's the matter? Are you actually going to refuse me? We locked eyes. She knew exactly what my choice would be before I even made it. To the outside world, I was a man so hopelessly in love that I would die for her without a second thought. So a drinking contest seemed like nothing. I didn't say another word of protest. I turned around, went downstairs, and signed my name on the contestant list. The bartender looked at me with pure skepticism, asking me several times if I was absolutely sure I wanted to do this. I nodded every time. In my mind, this was just another installment of the debt I owed for Alicia's life. The moment the whistle blew, the crowd erupted into a roar of excitement. I didn't say a word. I just focused on downing shot after shot, one after another, in grim silence. By the final round, it was just me and one other guy left standing. He eventually hit his limit and threw in the towel, looking at me with a mix of exhaustion and genuine respect for my sheer stubbornness. I had lost track of how much alcohol I had consumed. My body was operating on pure autopilot. I was just a machine, repeating the cycle of lifting the glass, swallowing the liquid, and setting it back down. It wasn't until the bartender grabbed my arm and hoisted it into the air that I realized the contest was over. I had won. My hands were trembling violently as I took the small velvet box from him. I began the long, dizzying trek back up the stairs. With every eye in the lounge on me, I stumbled over to Ava and held out the box. Here is the bracelet, I slurred. Ava looked at me, her face contorting into a deeper scowl as she watched me struggle to stand. My vision was blurred, and the floor felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. For some reason, a flash of something unreadable crossed her face, and she seemed to tense up. When I nudged the box toward her again, she snapped out of it, but she immediately pulled her hand away as if my touch would contaminate her. Instead, she reached out delicately and fastened the bracelet onto Ethan Thorne's wrist. Ethan admired the glimmering jewelry. Ava, what do you think? Does it look good on me? Ava stared at the bracelet, but her mind seemed stuck on the image of me looking like a mess just to win it. A wave of sudden annoyance seemed to hit her, and she abruptly ripped the bracelet off Ethan's arm. It looks hideous. Don't wear such garbage. I'll buy you something much better tomorrow. Just like that, the prize I had nearly killed my liver to win was tossed onto the dirty floor like a piece of trash. I kept my eyes on the floor and bent down to retrieve it. I'm going to the restroom, I murmured quietly. She didn't even bother to look at me. She probably didn't even hear me. I didn't try to get her attention again. I used the wall for support as I made my way to the restroom. The moment I closed the door, my stomach revolted. I collapsed in front of the toilet and retched until I thought my internal organs would come out. It felt like I was losing my soul. When the heaving finally stopped, I dragged myself over to the sink and stared at my reflection. My hair was a disaster, and my face was flushed red and puffy. I let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. How did I let my life become this? I splashed freezing water on my face and tried to straighten my clothes. I walked slowly back to the lounge. When I pushed the door open, the room was completely empty. They were gone. I didn't know if they had ditched me on purpose or if they had simply forgotten I was even there. It didn't really matter, though. Honestly, I felt a sense of relief. At least I didn't have to deal with Ava for the rest of the night. It was pitch black outside. The cold Chicago wind ripped through my alcohol-soaked shirt, chilling me to the bone. I huddled into myself and reached for my phone to call an Uber, but the battery was dead. I had no choice but to start walking along the shoulder of the road. I walked for 2 agonizing hours. I finally made it to the front door. The house was blazing with lights, and Ava was sitting right in the center of the living room. The moment she saw me, her face twisted with mockery. Look who finally showed up. Where the hell have you been? Who were you partying with after we left? She made it sound like I was out at some sleazy after-party, acting like a total degenerate. I felt a wave of nausea, and it wasn't just from the alcohol. My phone died, I said tonelessly. I had to walk back. Ava clearly didn't buy it. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, you walked back? Is that right? She stood up and headed for the stairs, tossing one last insult over her shoulder. Eureka booze. Don't even think about sleeping upstairs tonight. The smell of alcohol on me was her fault in the first place, but I didn't bother to argue. I showered in the downstairs bathroom, grabbed a spare blanket, and spent the night on the living room sofa. The next morning, I managed to sleep in a little later than usual, but I was eventually jolted awake by a call from Ava. Make lunch for 2 and bring it to the office. Hurry up, she barked as soon as I answered. She hung up before I could even process the request. Not that I ever had the power to say no anyway. I stayed on the sofa for a few moments, tried to find the energy to sit up. When I finally stood, my head spun violently. I knew exactly what was happening. I had caught a fever from walking home in the cold. My phone buzzed again. It was another iMessage from Ava. She had sent a list of dishes, and I recognized every single one as Ethan Thorne's favorites. She gave me a deadline of 40 minutes to have everything ready. I didn't even have time to find a bottle of Advil. I forced myself up and dragged my aching body into the kitchen. Even though I moved as fast as my fever would allow, I still missed her 40-minute deadline. When I finally made it to the Sterling Group headquarters, I hurried toward Ava's office. As I walked through the cubicles, I could hear the staff whispering. He's back again, one of them sneered. Still trying to suck up to the CEO? It is honestly pathetic. Now that Ethan Thorne is back, she doesn't even notice James Miller exists. You should just give up already. I ignored them. When I reached her office and pushed the door open, Ava's screaming voice hit me like a physical blow. Do you not understand what 40 minutes means? She shouted. I gave you a deadline. Do you have any idea how late you are? Ethan is starving. Can you even begin to make up for that? I was late, sure, but it was exactly noon. Unless Ethan Thorne had skipped breakfast entirely, there was no way he was actually starving. I didn't offer an excuse. I just placed the containers on her desk and turned to leave. Did I say you could leave? Ava's voice was like ice. Lay the food out properly. Another order. I took a deep breath, turned around, and began neatly arranging the containers on the table. Sometimes I wondered if the Sterlings had hired me as a bodyguard or if they just want a live-in maid they could abuse. She acted like an overgrown, spoiled brat who expected me to cater to her every basic need. As soon as the table was set, she looked at me again. Go get me coffee. I nodded and headed out. I had barely cleared the doorway when I heard Ethan's voice behind me. Ava, I'll go with him, Ethan said. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking toward the break room coffee machine. A moment later, Ethan Thorne was standing right next to me, leaning against the counter with a smug expression. I know you guys are technically married, he said dismissively, but we both know I'm the one she actually loves. I kept my eyes on the coffee beans I was grinding. I didn't even give him the satisfaction of a glance. I'm aware. I had known that since the day of the wedding. Ethan took my silence as a sign of defiance, and his face clouded over. He scowled, clearly looking for a reaction. I ignored him completely. Once the coffee was ready, I headed back to the office, never once looking in Ethan's direction. As we reached the door, I reached for the handle, but Ethan suddenly lunged forward, trying to shove past me. He slammed his shoulder into me. Damn it! The scalding hot coffee splashed directly across my hand. The searing pain was instantaneous, and it was so sharp it nearly knocked the wind out of me. Ava, who was at her desk, heard Ethan's fake cry of surprise and immediately jumped to her feet, rushing over to shield him. Ethan, are you okay? Did you get burned? Ethan sniffled, putting on his best act of a wounded victim. Ava, it is okay. It wasn't James's fault. I was being careless. He trailed off, but it was more than enough for Ava to draw her own conclusions. She snapped her head toward me, her eyes filled with rage. She shoved me back with brutal force. Between the fever and the shock, I couldn't keep my balance. I stumbled back into the partially open door, which sent me rebounding onto the floor outside the office. The remaining coffee in the cup splashed all over my front. You did that on purpose, didn't you? Ava screamed. You are so pathetic and jealous. Get out. Get out of my sight." Her shouting drew the attention of everyone in the surrounding cubicles. Heads started popping up, everyone eager to watch the humiliation. After she finished berating me, she turned back to comfort Ethan. She slammed the heavy office door shut right in my face. I was left on the floor with a crowd of people whispering and laughing at my expense. I slowly pushed myself up. I was covered in coffee stains, and the burn on my hand was throbbing painfully. I didn't stick around. I just turned and walked out of the building. Once I got back to the house, I used an app to order some burn cream and flu medicine. After cleaning the burn, I carefully tucked the remaining medication into my small first aid kit. The kit was already half full. It was a collection of burn ointments, painkillers, and cough syrups I had accumulated over the past year. When Ava returned that evening, I was applying a second layer of ointment to my hand. She paused as she was taking off her heels. She walked over to me. "I watched the security footage," she said flatly. "I know it was an accident, but Ethan Thorne has very sensitive skin. He bruises easily, so try to be more careful in the future." I almost let out a sarcastic laugh. Apparently, in her mind, my skin was leather and I could be treated however she pleased. I didn't say anything. She probably assumed I was just being sulky. To my surprise, she reached out and took the tube of ointment from my hand, then leaned down to apply it to my burn. I froze as she took my hand in hers. I didn't snap out of it until the cooling sensation of the cream hit my raw skin. She was actually helping me. My thoughts were a complete jumbled mess. I was struggling to find words when her phone suddenly started ringing loudly. The house was so quiet that I could hear Ethan Thorne's voice clearly through the speaker. "Ava, I feel really dizzy and nauseous. Can you come over and stay with me?" I felt her grip on my hand tighten painfully, and I couldn't help but wince. Ava didn't even notice my pain. Her face was full of anxiety. "Ethan, stay put. I'm coming right now. Just hang in there." She threw my hand aside so abruptly that it slammed into the corner of the marble coffee table. Then she rushed out the door without a second glance. A blinding flash of pain shot through my hand. I let out a muffled groan. Ava didn't even look back. The front door slammed shut with a heavy thud that echoed through the empty house for a long time. I sat on the sofa, clutching my injured hand for a long time. Eventually, the sharp agony faded into a dull, throbbing ache. I couldn't help but laugh at myself. I was an idiot for thinking, even for a second, that Ava Sterling might actually care about me. Once I finished treating my hand, I couldn't sleep. I decided to start packing up the few things that actually belonged to me. I had never considered this place a home anyway, so I didn't have much to pack. It only took a few minutes to fill a single carry-on suitcase. When I was done, I sat back down on the sofa. I looked out the large windows of the garden. It was filled with blooming flowers that I had planted myself. Gardening was the one hobby I had managed to keep. When I first started the garden, Ava had been nothing but cruel about it. "Do you actually think this is your home?" she had sneered. Back then, I just looked at the dirt and said nothing. I never thought of this place as home. I just needed something to focus on, a small comfort to help me survive these 3 years. Eventually, she stopped complaining, and I filled the entire backyard with blossoms. But now that it was time to leave, the sight of those flowers just felt wrong. After a moment of hesitation, I walked out into the yard and began pulling the plants up by their roots. It took me less than 4 hours to dismantle 3 years of hard work. The garden was bare. By the time I was finished, the sun was beginning to rise. I looked at the empty dirt one last time before heading back inside to shower. I took a quick shower. I was just about to lie down for a short nap when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Ava Sterling's name flashed on the screen. I grabbed the phone and answered it just before it went to voicemail. "Bring me a jacket," Ava said without preamble. "I'll send you the location. Usual rules." She hung up instantly. I stared at the black screen for a long moment, feeling a familiar weight in my chest. Why did I have to be the one to deliver a jacket? Then again, I already knew the answer. She just enjoyed the power trip of ordering me around. I grabbed a jacket, headed to the garage, and started the car. I had barely pulled out of the driveway when a sharp, stabbing pain flared in my chest. I struggled to catch my breath for a second. The feeling passed as quickly as it had come, so I pushed the concern to the back of my mind. I followed the GPS to the location, which turned out to be the shed aquarium. Ava's assistant was waiting for me at the entrance and signaled for me to follow her inside. The entire aquarium was empty. She had clearly rented out the whole place for the morning. I went up the stairs and immediately saw Ava and Ethan Thorne kneeling by the edge of an open dolphin tank. They were laughing and playing with the dolphins. I walked over and silently held the jacket out toward her. Ava gave me a quick glance. "You actually made it on time today. Impressive." She took the jacket and immediately draped it over Ethan's shoulders. "You have a cold, and you still insisted on coming here," she said to him softly. "Put this on before you get worse." Ethan smiled at her. "I have you to look after me, don't I? I know you won't let me stay sick for long." Ava nodded, a look of pure devotion on her face. Suddenly, Ethan let out a gasp. "Oh no, my bracelet!" One of the dolphins had surged up and snatched the chain right off his wrist. Ava immediately tried to soothe him. "It is okay, Ethan. I'll just buy you a new one." Ethan shook his head stubbornly. "No, I want that one. It was the first gift you ever gave me. It is special." "Fine." Ava sighed, a small, indulgent smile on her lips. She didn't even turn around to look at me. She spoke as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. "I heard you used to do underwater shows and aquarium back in the day, right? It shouldn't be that hard for you to get the bracelet back from the dolphin. Go ahead and get it for him." My chest felt tight. She was right. To pay for Alicia's medical bills, I had worked every odd job imaginable, including underwater performing. I hadn't done a dive like that in years. Despite everything, I still couldn't say no. I lowered myself into the water and floated for a moment, taking a deep breath. That sharp pain in my chest returned, more intense this time, but Ava was already barking at me to hurry up. I took a final breath and dove under. Having worked with dolphins before, I knew how to handle them. Luckily, the dolphin was just being playful and hadn't swallowed the jewelry. I managed to retrieve the bracelet fairly quickly. I started to swim back toward the surface, but the dolphin thought this was a game. It kept nudging me with its snout, blocking my path to the surface. My movements were becoming sluggish. Between the lack of sleep and the fever I was fighting, I felt my strength rapidly draining away. I finally broke the surface, but the world suddenly tilted. Everything went black. I lost consciousness completely, though my fingers remained clamped tight around Ethan's bracelet. Just before everything went dark, I felt a pair of strong hands grabbing me and pulling me out of the tank. Who was it? Probably one of the aquarium staff, I thought as I drifted off. I was unconscious in a hospital bed. Ava and Hannah Sterling were sitting on the sofa in the corner of the room. Hannah had been to the hospital for a routine appointment and happened to see me being wheeled in on a gurney. The doctor reviewed my chart and gave them a summary. "It is mostly exhaustion and sleep deprivation, compounded by an untreated flu." His body simply gave out, the doctor added. Hannah let out a sigh of relief. After all, she was the one who had brought me into her daughter's life. She looked at my bloodless, pale lips and felt a twinge of guilt. Hannah couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her daughter. Ava had never been this cruel before. What had changed her? Finally, she couldn't keep quiet. "Ava, what is this? There are only 2 days left. How could you push him this hard?" Ava's brow furrowed as she interrupted her mother. "Mom, what do you mean 2 days?" Hannah realized she had said too much. She gave a forced, awkward laugh. "Oh, nothing. I was just rambling." Ava knew something was off, but before she could press her mother for answers, her phone started ringing. She answered the call and walked out of the room without saying another word to anyone. I eventually regained consciousness. Hannah was still there, sitting by my bedside. I blinked in surprise. She looked uncomfortable as she started to speak. "My daughter, I'm sorry," I said, cutting her off. "It doesn't matter. I only stayed for the sake of the agreement," I added. She looked stunned. She clearly hadn't expected me to be so blunt about the transactional nature of my relationship with Ava. I turned my head away, making it clear I was done talking. Hannah took the hint and quietly left the room. After the door clicked shut, I closed my eyes and drifted back into a restless sleep. When I woke up again, the room was dark. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I saw a new post from Ethan Thorne on his ends. It was a photo of a high-end designer bracelet. The caption read, "The dolphin ruined the old one, so she immediately got me a brand new one. When you find a woman like this, you never let her go." I didn't even have to guess. The bracelet I had nearly drowned for had almost certainly been tossed in a trash can. I felt a bitter, hollow smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Another notification popped up. It was a video. My hands were shaking as I tapped on it. It was Alicia. She was in a physical therapy session. I knew immediately that the Sterlings had sent it to show me her progress. I saved the video and watched it on a loop, my heart aching with relief. Tears began to well up and roll down my cheeks, soaking into the hospital blanket. "Who is she?" Ava's sharp voice suddenly cut through the silence. I jumped, quickly flipping my phone over and wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Ava looked dark and irritated. She reached out, trying to snatch the phone from my hand. "I asked you a question. Who is that woman? Answer me." It was the first time I had ever seen her so worked up about anything related to me. I held onto my phone firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's just an old friend from college." When she didn't seem satisfied, I added, "We haven't spoken in years." That seemed to calm her down slightly. She held out her hand. "If you don't talk anymore, then she isn't important. Delete the video. Actually, give it to me. I'll do it." To avoid making her more suspicious, I handed her the phone. I watched in silence as she deleted the only footage I had of my sister's recovery. When she was done, her cold mask returned. "Pack your stuff. I'm taking you home." I was stunned. I never expected her to pick me up herself. "Hurry up," she snapped. "I'll be waiting in the car." I got dressed and went down to the parking lot. I walked to the car and reflexively went for the back door. "Do I look like your chauffeur?" Ava asked coldly. "Get in the front seat." I closed the back door and walked around to the passenger side. We were halfway home when she suddenly spoke up. "What happened to the flowers in the garden?" I was taken aback. So, she had already been back to the house. I tried to sound indifferent. I didn't want them anymore, so I got rid of them. Ava let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You really think you own the place, don't you? Planting things whenever you feel like it and tearing them up when you're bored. Must be nice to do whatever you want." "I never thought of it that way," I said quietly. What I meant was that it was never my home to begin with. Home was wherever Alicia was. Ava misunderstood me. She thought I was saying that I had never expected to have any freedom in her house. She gave a dismissive snort and fell silent. The rest of the drive was spent in awkward silence until we reached the driveway. I froze the moment we walked through the door. There was someone else in the house. "Ethan is staying with us for a few days," Ava said offhandedly. She hadn't even bothered to ask for my opinion. Not that it would have mattered anyway. I was nothing more than a temporary guest in this house. I had no right to have an opinion. I just gave a silent nod. Ethan stood up with a smug smile. "You don't mind, do you, James?" I started to respond, but Ava cut me off immediately. "He doesn't have a say in the matter. Ethan, make yourself at home." I looked down, a bitter, self-mocking smile touching my lips. To me, her message was always don't get too comfortable. To him, it was consider this your own home. The difference between being loved and being tolerated was glaringly obvious. But it didn't matter. My time here was almost up. Soon enough, I would be gone from their lives forever. And just like that, Ethan Thorne was a permanent fixture in the house. Oddly enough, even after he moved in, Ava didn't move to a different room. She still shared the same bed with me every night. I didn't dwell on it. On the final morning of my contract, Ava was already gone when I woke up. I walked out of the bedroom and found Ethan standing in the hallway, staring blankly at a piece of art on the wall. I tried to head for the stairs, but Ethan called out to me before I could pass him. "I always figured you would have left by now, considering how Ava treats you. I'm surprised you've lasted this long. Is it loyalty or just desperation?" He started circling me, studying me as if I were some kind of exotic specimen in a cage. "She used to tell me how obsessed you were with her. I didn't believe her then, but I'm starting to see it now. Who else would keep coming back for more after being treated like garbage? Only you, James." I scowled, wondering what kind of game he was playing this time. He continued with a smirk. "It is a shame, though. All that devotion for absolutely nothing. She doesn't love you. She never has. But you already knew that, didn't you?" I didn't react. I had known the truth for 3 years. I just couldn't figure out why he kept saying it. It was almost like he was trying to convince himself more than me. Ethan finally stopped his circling and stood directly in front of me. "So," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "what do you think Ava would do if she thought you pushed me downstairs?" My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? I didn't touch you." Ethan's mouth twisted into a malicious grin. "Not yet, but you're about to." Just then, we heard the sound of the front door opening downstairs. Ethan took 2 quick steps back and then threw himself backward, tumbling down the long flight of stairs. I lunged forward to catch him, but my hands only grasped thin air. Ava walked through the door at that exact second. She looked up and saw Ethan lying crumpled and motionless at the foot of the staircase. She screamed and rushed over, gathering him into her arms. Even though he was heavy, she somehow managed to hoist him up and carry him toward the upstairs guest room. As she reached the landing, she slammed her shoulder into me with enough force to knock me aside. She shoved me out of her way. Through the partially open door of the bedroom, I saw Ethan Thorne look back at me. His eyes were full of triumph, and he actually had the nerve to smirk at me. I stood there, frozen in shock. I couldn't believe he would actually hurt himself just to frame me. When Ethan saw my expression change, he instantly dropped the smirk and replaced it with a look of agony. He looked up at Ava, his voice weak and trembling. "Ava, please don't be mad at James. It was my fault. I shouldn't have provoked him. I'm sure he didn't mean to push me." Ava's face softened as she looked at him. "You're too kind, Ethan. That's why people like him take advantage of you. Just stay still. I'm calling a doctor." She stood up, closed the bedroom door, and then turned to face me. She walked toward me slowly. I backed up instinctively until I hit the hallway wall. Without saying a single word, she grabbed my wrist and began dragging me down the stairs. I tried to pull away, but her grip was like a vice. Halfway down the stairs, I lost my footing and tumbled down the remaining steps. The impact left me breathless and aching. She didn't even slow down. She dragged me across the floor and toward the door of the downstairs guest room. She dragged me over to a large storage cabinet. That's when I realized what she was doing. She was going to lock me inside. A wave of pure panic hit me. I gripped the edges of the cabinet door, my voice shaking. "Ava, please." "I didn't do it." He threw himself down the stairs, I swear. I thought back to the darkest time in my life, when I lived in a freezing, damp basement infested with rats. Ever since then, I've suffered from severe claustrophobia. I can't handle small, enclosed spaces. And now, she was trying to shove me into a wooden cabinet that was even smaller than that basement room. Ava didn't believe a word I said. Without hesitating, she began prying my fingers off the door one by one. She shoved me inside and slammed the door shut with a loud thud. I could hear her outside, sliding a heavy wooden bar through the handles to lock me in. The darkness was absolute. Cold sweat started pouring down my face. I hammered on the door with my fists, screaming at the top of my lungs. "Ava, Ava, let me out. Please, I can't be in here." There was no sound from the other side. No footsteps, no voice. Nothing. I eventually lost the strength to keep hitting the door. I slumped down against the back of the cabinet, my body trembling. I curled into a ball, clutching my knees to my chest. In the silence, I started hallucinating the sound of dripping water and the scuttling of rats. For a moment, I was convinced I was back in that rotting basement. I was trapped in the dark again, buried under the weight of endless shifts and stacks of medical bills for my dying sister. After what felt like hours, the crushing feeling in my chest finally began to ease. I reminded myself that Alicia was getting better. Those dark days were over. I don't know how much time passed, but the cabinet door was eventually pulled open. The sudden light was blinding, and I had to shield my eyes. Ava stood there, looking shocked. I must have looked like a wreck, with my hair matted and my lips completely white. My forehead was drenched in sweat. She clearly hadn't expected me to react this way. She had probably just wanted to teach me a lesson. A flash of something like guilt seemed to cross her face. She hesitated for a moment before reaching down to help me up. The second her fingers touched me, I flinched as if I had been electrocuted. I scrambled back into the corner of the cabinet. I looked at her like she was a monster. That reaction seemed to kill whatever guilt she had felt, and her face hardened again. Ava's expression darkened. She reached in and roughly hauled me out of the cabinet, berating me the whole time. Ethan is just staying here for a few days. I had no idea you were this petty. I can't believe you actually tried to hurt him. Do you realize that's a crime? She dragged me to my feet. I didn't have the energy to fight back, and I didn't see the point in trying to explain myself anymore. It didn't matter. Today was the final day of the contract. Regardless of what she thought of me, I would be gone by tomorrow morning. My lack of a reaction seemed to make her even angrier. She dragged me all the way up to Ethan Thorne's room. The doctor had obviously just left. There was a tube of medical ointment on the nightstand. Ava shoved me, sending me tumbling to the floor. My entire body was aching. She stood over me, her voice cold and commanding. Apply the ointment to Ethan. I was done fighting. I silently reached out and picked up the tube. On your knees, Ava added coldly. I looked up at her, unable to believe she was serious. Ava stared back at me with a heart of stone. She thought to herself that if I just begged for forgiveness, she might let me off the hook. I just looked at her for a long moment. Finally, I spoke, each word clear and deliberate. Ava, this is the very last time. She didn't have time to process what I meant by that. I simply turned around and began applying the medicine to Ethan's supposed injuries. For once, it was Ava who looked stunned into silence. I didn't look at her again. The only thought in my mind was that I was finally going to be reunited with Alicia. Ava didn't even wait for me to finish before she grabbed me and shoved me out of the room. I looked at the closed door and felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. It was finally over. I went back to my bedroom and tucked the last of my belongings into my suitcase. Tomorrow, after one last meeting with Martin Sterling, this chapter of my life would be closed forever. I couldn't sleep a wink that night, too excited about seeing Alicia. Ava didn't come back to the bedroom. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, I grabbed my suitcase and headed downstairs. Fortunately, Ava was still sound asleep. I drove to the Sterling family estate, where Martin handed me the divorce papers. Sign this, he said. From this moment on, you and Ava are finished. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. Martin handed me an envelope containing a plane ticket, a new phone, and a debit card. Someone will meet you when you land and take you to your sister, he explained. I placed my old phone on the coffee table and took the envelope. Thank you, Martin, I said sincerely. I meant it. Regardless of how miserable the past 3 years had been, the Sterlings had saved Alicia's life. I would always be grateful for that. I was about to leave when I thought of Ava. I stopped in my tracks. I turned back to Martin. I have one final request. Please don't tell Ava where I've gone. Martin looked a bit confused by the request, but he gave me a slow nod of agreement. With his promise secured, I left the Sterling estate and didn't look back. I headed straight for the airport to board my flight home. Martin finished his tea in silence. He picked up my old phone and walked toward the trash can. Suddenly, the phone in his hand began to vibrate violently. The name flashing on the screen was Ava. Martin answered the call. Ava's voice immediately blasted through the speaker, frantic and demanding. Where the hell are you? I've looked everywhere in the house. Martin's voice was calm and steady. He is gone, Ava. Ava was stunned when she realized it was her father's voice. What? Dad? Martin didn't sugarcoat it. James has divorced you. It is over. Stop looking for him. You're free to be with whoever you want now. Ava couldn't process what he was saying. She hung up the phone before he could say another word. The word divorce kept ringing in her head, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it. She refused to accept it. She went through the house one more time, searching every room. That was when she finally noticed it. Some things were missing. James's things were gone. He had so few personal belongings that it was easy to miss at first glance. But looking around now, she realized the room was devoid of any trace of him. The realization that her father had his phone sent a cold shiver down her spine. Ava threw on some clothes and hurried out of the bedroom. As she reached the top of the stairs, Ethan Thorne stepped out of the guest room. Ava, where are you going in such a rush? I wanted to have breakfast with you. He reached out to take her arm affectionately. Normally, Ava would have dropped everything to spend time with him. But right now, her only thought was of James Miller. She irritably pulled her arm away. Eat by yourself. She walked out without looking back. She drove to the Sterling estate at breakneck speed, pushing the car to its limits. Martin was sitting in the living room. He didn't even look up when she burst through the door. "Dad, what did you mean on the phone? And why the hell do you have James's phone?" Martin didn't say a word. He reached under the coffee table and pulled out a stack of papers, placing them in front of her. "James is already signed. Once you add your signature, the divorce will be finalized." Seeing the bold letters at the top of the page, Ava realized her father wasn't joking. But she still couldn't wrap her mind around the idea that James would actually want to leave her. She grabbed the papers and flipped to the last page. James Miller's signature was there, clear as day. She stared at it in disbelief before slamming the papers back onto the table. "Where is he? He would never divorce me. You must have forced him to sign this." To her, the only logical explanation was that her father had finally forced James out because he looked down on his humble beginnings. Martin knew she would be stubborn, but he hadn't expected this level of outrage. He remained silent for a moment before deciding it was time for her to know the truth. "3 years ago, we were told you were facing a serious threat to your safety. So we went looking for someone who could protect you and keep you grounded. We found James Miller. I offered to save someone he loved in exchange for him marrying you and staying by your side. Today, that contract expired, and he chose to leave." Ava felt as if her heart had stopped, but she still fought against the truth. James loved her. He worshipped the ground she walked on. How could it all have been a contract? "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." Martin let out a long sigh. "Think about how you've treated him for the last 3 years, Ava. Why else would anyone put up with that for so long? Real life isn't a fairy tale." Images of her treatment of James over the past year flooded her mind. She remembered her mother's cryptic words in the hospital. Finally, she remembered James's voice from the night before, saying, "This is the very last time." As the realization began to sink in, she finally understood the look in his eyes last night. He hadn't been looking at her with love. It was just the cold, patient tolerance one might show to a difficult client. "No, it is not true," she murmured. Martin knew she was in denial. He walked upstairs and returned with the original contract. Ava stared at the signed document, and the truth finally became undeniable. In that instant, her world collapsed around her. "You all lied to me," she screamed. "Everyone lied to me." The contract slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. "You all lied to me," she whispered, her head spinning with rage and betrayal. She snapped her head up and glared at her father. "Where is James? You know where he is. Tell me now." Martin didn't take her outburst personally. He simply remained silent, staying true to his promise to James. "He has done more than enough for you over the last few years. Ava, sign the papers and let him move on with his life. You seem to care for Ethan Thorne. If you want to marry him, I won't stand in your way." "I'll find him myself then," she spat. When she got back to the villa, Ethan was already gone. Ava didn't care where Ethan had gone. She locked herself in her home office and immediately called her assistant to track down James Miller. She started calling all their mutual acquaintances. When they heard she was looking for James, they were all caught off guard. In their social circle, James was always seen as nothing more than Ava's devoted lapdog, someone who was constantly ignored and mistreated. She refused to answer any of their questions. She just kept repeating the same command. "Just help me find him." As the initial shock wore off, a nagging question began to surface in her mind. Why was she so upset? Her eyes drifted to James's old phone sitting on the desk. She picked it up and turned it on. Deep down, in a place she hadn't yet acknowledged, she was still holding onto a flicker of hope. She couldn't accept the idea that he had never felt anything for her at all. But when she opened his notes app, that last bit of hope was brutally crushed. The first entry was from the day the contract was signed. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for this opportunity. I can finally save you." The second was on our wedding day. "The house is massive and so empty. I'm going to do my best. Hang in there, Alicia." 6 months into the marriage. Alicia has a treatment plan now. Ava Sterling actually isn't that hard to deal with when she's in a good mood. Their first anniversary. Ava's first love is back in town. Every day since then has been a total nightmare. And the final note, written 5 days ago. Just 5 more days, and it's finally over. I can finally be with Alicia again. Every single note was filled with his overwhelming devotion to this person named Alicia. Ava stared at the screen until her eyes burned. She finally shut the phone off, her mind made up. She had to find James Miller and get some answers. She pulled up the security footage from the stairs. It was clear as day. Ethan Thorne had thrown himself backward. The weight of what she had done to James because of a lie hit her like a physical blow. She grabbed her phone and dialed Ethan Thorne's number. Ethan answered, completely oblivious to the fact that Ava was barely containing her fury. "Did James actually push you down the stairs yesterday?" Ava asked coldly. Ethan paused. Then his voice took on a pathetic, wounded tone. "Of course he did," Ethan whined. "Don't you dare lie to me," Ava interrupted. "I've already seen the security footage." She hung up the phone and drove straight to his place. When he opened the door, she shoved him with so much force he sprawled onto the floor. "Ava, I only did it because I love you. You know that. Regardless of the contract, James was my husband. You actually thought you could pull that? You're disgusting." She dragged Ethan Thorne to the same cabinet where she had locked James and shoved him inside. "You're going to experience exactly what James felt." She locked the bar into place, but didn't walk away. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring directly at the cabinet door. In that moment, she was back in that room last night. Only then, she had walked away after locking the door on James. Had James screamed like this? Had he hammered on the door while she ignored him? Was that why he had flinched when she tried to touch him afterward? A sharp, agonizing pain ripped through her heart without warning. Everyone was gone. Who was left to care for her? Her friends eventually left her alone in the massive house. "James," she slurred, her voice echoing through the halls. "I'm drunk. Come take care of me." Eventually, she stumbled out into the backyard and stood over the patch of bare dirt. "Hey, James, where are your flowers? I thought you filled the whole yard with them. Why are they gone?" She had always had a high tolerance. She wasn't drunk enough to forget, and that was the problem. She remembered sobbing at the bar, and she remembered kneeling in the dirt, begging James Miller to stay. Without even realizing it, her feelings for James had taken root deep within her. "Mom, please tell me where he is. I won't ruin it this time. I promise." Hannah felt her heart ache for her daughter, but she truly had no idea where I had gone. Martin just gave her a cold look and let out a derisive snort when she asked. "He doesn't want anything to do with you, Ava. If you want to find him, do it on your own." When I arrived at the rehab center in Vermont, the nurse told me Alicia was in the middle of a physical therapy session. "James!" I whipped my head toward the door and saw Alicia Miller running toward me. She threw herself into my arms. "James, what happened to your hand? Who did this?" I quickly pulled my sleeve down to hide the burn. "It is nothing, Alicia. I'm Phoenix." I didn't want to tell her about the misery I had endured. "James, where did all this money come from?" Alicia asked. Martin Sterling had settled my final payment the day I left Chicago. After dinner, we were walking back to our apartment in the quiet Vermont town when I saw a figure standing in the shadows. Ava Sterling saw us and immediately marched over. Her voice was raspy and filled with suspicion. "Who is she? Is this who you lied to me for? Answer me, James." Alicia shoved Ava back, her eyes flashing with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you? You're hurting him. You know the contract is over, Ava. I never signed those papers. We are still married. Whether you sign or not is your business. As far as I'm concerned, it's done." I pulled my hand out of her grip and turned my back on her for good. As my hand slipped from hers, Ava stood frozen on the sidewalk. Ava seemed strangely calm this time. She just sat there, picking at her food. "I'll let you go, but only if you cut ties with that woman." "Are you serious?" "Alicia is my sister. My actual sister." Ava was speechless. "James, please. Just give me one more chance." Alicia slapped Ava across the face before I could stop her. "What is wrong with you? Why did you take my brother?" "James, think about what I told you," Ava said, ignoring the sting on her cheek. "I'm not giving up. I'm going to win you back." "James, what is the truth about you and her?" I sat Alicia down and told her the whole story of the past 3 years. By the time I finished, Alicia was sobbing. "It's okay," I whispered, hugging her. "It is all in the past now. No amount of grand gestures or fireworks could fix what she had broken. I was done with the drama. James, I love you. I am so sorry for how I treated you. I regret every second of it. I just want things to go back to the way they were between us. That's never going to happen. I have no desire to go back to that life. She realized something was wrong when the neighbor finally snapped at her. The guy who lived there packed his bags and left yesterday. She realized I had disappeared again to get away from her. James is gone again, she whispered. James, I finally found you. Please, don't ever leave like that again. I want to take care of you and your sister, she pleaded. I don't need you to take care of me, Ava, I replied firmly. James was exhausted. She had expected him to hate her or be cold, but this was different. She never imagined that her mere presence would be a burden to him. Happy birthday, James. This is the first birthday I've ever spent with you. I'm sorry for everything. I treated you terribly, and I know it's all my fault. All right, I'll do whatever you want. Ethan Thorne blamed her for everything. He slammed his foot on the gas and aimed his car directly at her taxi. Ava barely survived. Ethan had intended to kill her. She lived, but her right leg was permanently mangled. She spent 2 more months in recovery. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison. Whenever the pain of her regrets becomes too much to bear, she bows her head. She softly kisses the wedding ring hanging from the chain around her neck. It is as if that small gesture gives her just enough strength to survive one more day. Perhaps it will be just enough to help her endure whatever time she is left. This story does not have a fairy tale ending. Ava will spend every remaining day of her life haunted by regret, while James finally gets to live a life where he no longer has to suffer in silence. Love shouldn't require you to crawl in the dirt, because real love is about 2 people truly seeing and valuing one another. You are a human being, not a tool to be used and discarded at someone else's convenience. May you always have the courage to open your heart to love, but also the strength to walk away when that love is no longer earned.